Hey guys, old versus new. Um, I'm not old. It was just yesterday. I remember reading Marvel Premiere with the first issue of Warlock. Um, but what a little while ago I did a contest video for Onesie Angelique about what is the impossible question of what is the greatest comic book ever. Um, Makes you feel like you should have read even more comic books to answer that question. But I picked a pretty old comic book from like 1970 or so. I felt like I should have been picking a comic book from 1940. Um, some people in my comments, mentioned some new things like Sandman or Transmetropolitan, and Cursive Man picked the most recent Thor, um, and my thoughts bounced off of that because, well, also I've been obsessing over a bunch of these '70s creations like Warlock, um, and the Defenders. The Defenders was a new team in the '70s. It didn't have feature characters that were created at that time, I don't think. Although maybe Valkyrie, who was in Defenders, maybe she was new at that time. Anyway, I digress. Uh, what my bouncing of my brain off of this led me to is part of me when I start thinking about this thinks, oh my God, there's so much focusing on old characters, not just old comic books, but old characters. Batman is still number one, or is number one again, because he isn't always the number one character, but he is the number one character in terms of sales and listening to people talk about things on YouTube. You probably hear more about Batman than anyone else. So he was created in, 1939? A lot of the top heroes, all the top DC heroes were created in that era, I believe. Are there any top? Well, Swamp Thing, if he's a top character, was created in the late '60s. All the top Marvel characters were created in the early '60s. And I was excited. I just was reading about them bringing back Magnus Robot Hunter, what is he called? Magnus Robot Killer? That's what he does, he kills robots. Anyway, Magnus was coming back, and I think he's a Gold Key character from the 50s, and Solar, Man of the Atom. Those two are both ones I actually learned about in the 90s, or actually read. I think I'd heard about them before then, but read them in the 90s in their Valiant Comics incarnation. And so they're coming back for their third or fourth incarnations. And I got excited about that. And that's kind of weird. Always, is all of this comic book stuff just nostalgia? Is it all being excited about old characters? So when I came into comic books sometime in the 70s, mostly the mid-70s, I guess, they were creating new characters all the time, like Adam Warlock, like Man-Thing and Swamp Thing, and Marvel was creating tons of new characters. They were throwing things up against the wall. I haven't read it, but I heard someone talking about, like, they had Iron Fist was created in the '70s, and Luke Cage, now called, I'm not sure what Luke Cage is called now, because I guess there's a new Power Man that isn't Luke Cage, and is there a new Iron Fist that isn't the original Iron Fist? Shang-Chi, Master of Kung Fu from the '70s. I should have researched more, but I know there were tons and tons of Marvel characters being created in the '70s. Maybe all the young Turks wanted to be like Stan Lee, who had just created the Marvel Universe. They wanted to add their own part on. Wolverine was created in the '70s. Lots of these key X-Men heroes were created in the '70s. I suppose more X-Men. The X-Men may be one where they've kept creating new characters. When did the X-Men stop creating new characters? Are they still creating? Well, they are, because Brian Michael Bendis is adding in new mutants in the Uncanny X-Men, which is the Scott Summers version of the X-Men right now. And maybe they're adding in other mutants. When I say new mutants, then I think I'm talking about the comic book New Mutants. So that's a big plus. Are the new characters as good? It seems like, so it feels to me like the 70s was the last time where there was this huge flowering of new characters. Maybe in the 80s too. I think DC started doing a lot of new characters in the 80s. DC had a few new ones in the 70s, like Black Lightning. I want to say things like Blue Devil and others came up in the 80s. With DC has such a long history, they often pull out some obscure character and you think it's new. DC also has a habit of buying up other comic book companies and then slowly putting their characters into their own universe. All the Charlton characters are part of the DC universe, like The Question and Captain Atom. That's what his name is. And, they've more recently absorbed the Wildstorm characters, so they've got the Stormwatch characters and a bunch of other characters that they can play with from there. I suppose that's a different topic, but I think it makes the DC universe interesting, but a horrible, horrible mess. Because many of these characters replicate each other in basic ways. Like the Midnighter in Batman or something like that. Not that the Midnighter isn't a very cool character, but they look alike. So, I keep digressing. So there are new characters out there. We get a few new. I'm pretty much talking about superheroes, I guess, because in general, those are the characters that become these serial characters that go on forever, or potentially go on forever. I don't think the characters in Saga, they'll have their arc. It might be quite a long one, but then it will be over, and that's it for them. They're not going to potentially be just continuing on and on forever. I guess before superheroes, you had Sunday comics like Flash Gordon and Prince Valiant, whose adventures were designed to go on forever. But and even in the indie comics, we have a lot of old characters being revived. Things that are out of copyright, maybe the Shadow and the Spider and the Green Hornet and all of that. And the newer characters seem far and few between. I even thought, like Brain Boy, which I haven't read, from Dark Horse was new, but apparently that's from some obscure comic book company in the 60s. I don't know if The Occultist is a brand new character, maybe it is. But I think Dark Horse in the 90s, tried to create a whole bunch of new characters, and now they're bringing back some of them, like X, and I'm not sure if there's others, actually. I think they called it the World's Greatest Universe, which kind of harkened back to the Fantastic Four being called the world's greatest comic book. So, like Robert Kirkman's created new superheroes, like Invincible, and seems to have been successful with it. He had a Man-Wolf or something, or Wolfman, which flopped. Where's that still going? And he has Dinosaur Man, a kid's comic, or intended as a kid's comic. So far, it hasn't seemed, when I've tried it, hasn't seemed like something my daughter would like, but maybe older kids' comic. But it seems like there's very few new superheroes. And is it, I feel mixed feelings. Like at one point, I pretty much thought Batman was done. But now I've come back to Batman. But a lot of Batman is the nostalgic Batman, the Batman 66, and the Legends of the Dark Knight have this kind of retro nostalgic feeling most of the time. But I suppose someone like Scott Snyder combines the nostalgia with a little something new. But is that a sign that comic book superhero comics are really a dead genre? That just doesn't know it. That they don't successfully create new superheroes anymore. Everything feels like a retread. I suppose, like, part of it is titling. There's some conservativeness in titling, so everything is an X-Men comic book. Legion was in a comic book called X-Men Legacy. If he was given his own comic book called Legion, I know he's not a brand new superhero, but he's newer, and it would have been the first time. It was the first time, as far as I know, that he got his own comic book. I shouldn't even say that because I don't know enough X-Men history. Anyway, I'm babbling. But so there's the Fearless Defenders. There was the Secret Defenders and the Fearless Defenders. And the Fearless Defenders have nothing to do with the Secret Defenders. The Secret Defenders did have a connection to the original Defenders. So sometimes there's just a recycling of titles. Or there's a taking of old characters and making them something completely new. You could say that all that needed to be said about Thor, the Marvel version of Thor, had been done by Jack Kirby and John Buscema and then Walt Simonson, and pretty much I can hardly remember what the other Thors were since Walt Simonson. And so it seems like maybe Jason Aaron is really redoing Thor, rethinking him as this epic fantasy character. And so maybe that's one way that people sneak in new characters, is taking an old character and just making a new character out of them. But is that also a sign of a zombie superhero world? I say all this as throwing out a question that I throw out at myself mostly, because I enjoy, like I said, I was really excited to see Magnus Robot Fighter, Robot Hunter, Robot Wrestler was coming back, and Solar Man. For some reason, I really like Solar Man of the Atom. I don't know why. And I get him confused with Dr. Solar. This is Ultra Digressions. I feel like there must be other new superheroes. Resurrection Man, I guess, has he been around since the 70s? I really enjoyed his New 52 run, but I'm not sure how. That was the first time I ever read Resurrection Man. I don't know how long he's been around. Vertigo had such success, like with Animal Man, of bringing back things that seemed obscure and no one cared about and making really cool comics about them. And then that got reabsorbed in the whole comic book industry, and they seem so much more focused on that. But it would be exciting, but I suppose mostly lead to economic failures if Marvel or DC just started pumping out, a new superhero every few months, the way they did in the 70s, it seemed. They had comic books like Marvel Premiere where they would just try out a bunch of new things. Like most recently, I bought something called Wood God. I don't know if he ever reappeared. Yeah, and at Image we get The Bounce and Sex and Reality Check. Those all have new superheroes. It doesn't feel like they're designed to last, but maybe they could. I haven't read The Bounce yet. I'm kind of curious about that. I've just decided to drop Reality Check, or at least dropped it from my pull list. I can always pick it up for an issue or two more and see how it goes. That's the one where the superhero comes out of the comic book and meets his creator. And the superhero is kind of like a horny version of Batman. Maybe just all the good superhero ideas have been long used up. And, the superhero concept is great, but is there really anything new to do with it? It's been so thoroughly mined. So just sit back and enjoy the ride with all the great superheroes that we've already made, and continue with that. Anyway, In an ideal world, I would like to see some things continue and see new superheroes come out. But would I support enough of them? Would everyone else support enough of them? I pretty much considered the Fantastic Four dead in the water till Jonathan Hickman came along and got a new angle on them that still felt like the Fantastic Four to me. So clearly you can always be surprised, and everyone comes in at a different point. I believe that Gambit 896 started his Thor reading with the Michael Straczynski run, so that probably, everyone, as you cycle through generations, the superheroes can keep going and be reused. But to me, before Michael J. Straczynski came on Thor, I'd already kind of burnt out on it, and maybe I should read. I read an issue or two by Straczynski, and it seemed okay, but I just didn't get excited, just because I'd read so much Thor. Yeah, so that's the thought for this time. I think I'm getting really close to the end of this Sleepy Vlog countdown, which is now kind of pointless, because the idea was to do a vlog a day, and it's stretched out nearly 2 months. But once I start the numbering, I just have to keep following it. I think this will be Sleepy Vlog number 3. So we've got 2 and 1 to do. Maybe I'll do a Sleepy Vlog 0 too. And after that, no more Sleepy Vlogs ever. Total lie. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.